to the Software Process and Measurement Cast number 607. I'm Tom Cagley, your host. In the SPaMCAST 607, we feature our interview with Mark Tolbert and Susan Parente to discuss their new book, Hybrid Project Management Using Agile with Traditional Project Management Methodologies to Succeed on Modern Projects. Agile hybrids are often pilloried. Mark and Susan make a strong case that hybrids have a place in delivering value. Without hybrids, there are places that Agile can't go. Mark's bio. Mark has over 30 years of experience in IT, including 27 years at Hewlett-Packard. He successfully managed support programs and projects within HP services from 1994 through 2007. The projects and programs included a large e-selling program, a multi-vendor support program for a large telecommunications company, data center relocation projects, and MDM, mobile device management programs. Reach out to Mark on LinkedIn, link in the show notes. Susan Parente, who does the I'm Not a Scrum-Fundamentalist column on the podcast. But her bio, Susan Parente is a project engineer, consultant, speaker, author, professor, and mentor who leads large complex IT software implementation projects and the establishment of enterprise PMOs. She has 23 years of experience with leading software and business development projects in the private and public sectors, including a decade of experience implementing IT projects for the DoD and other federal government agencies. Are you ready to talk hybrid agile project management? Mark Tolbert, Susan Parente, welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast. You know, this almost feels like deja vu, but you guys wrote or are just finishing a new book together, Hybrid Project Management Using Agile with Traditional Project Management Methodologies to Succeed on Modern Projects. Before we really get into the nuts and bolts here, why don't we start with what do we mean by hybrid project management? Mark, why don't you dive in here?
Okay, excellent. There are two main methodologies for doing project management today. So the traditional approach, or waterfall approach as we call it, do predictive planning, try to figure out everything in depth up front before you start the execution phases, if you will, of the project. So this would be what we would use in a construction project or an engineering project. Make sure you get everything locked down, airtight, all the blueprints completed, I's dotted, T's crossed before you start construction. So this is waterfall. This is the traditional approach. This is what we started using way back in the 1960s, 1970s, kind of with the birth of modern project management. Some people tried to use this approach with software projects too. This is how I did things as a COBOL programmer, systems analyst back in the late 70s doing database applications. So it doesn't work so well with software, and it doesn't work well also with other types of projects that we call knowledge work projects. So anything that involves intellectual work, design work, where we need to be creative, we're discovering and we're exploring requirements. There's tremendous change, there's tremendous volatility. We're going in with the presumption that the customer doesn't know exactly what they want at the beginning, and our job is to go discover and explore what design solution is going to work best. So the key methodology in that world, which dominates our world today, are the Agile methodologies. So there are many different Agile methodologies. The most popular in the literature, they would say 70% of the people doing Agile today are really using Scrum. So that is by far the most important, the most popular of all the Agile methodologies. But it also includes methodologies like Extreme. People include Kanban. They include Lean, Crystal, DSDM. Can be some of the other methodologies there. So that is, for me, I think that's the elephant in the room. That's the most important methodology in our modern world today. But I believe that in most of our projects today, we really have a need to mix the two. So this is hybrid project management. Our projects are probably large enough and complex enough today that parts of the project are things that we've done many, many times before. We've got excellent historical records for those pieces. We've done those pieces hundreds of times before. Therefore, we've got excellent historical records for estimating time and cost. And it makes sense in that world to use the predictive planning approach, to use waterfall. It's going to be less expensive. It's going to be more efficient. It makes sense to have the classic empowered project manager, the quote unquote command and control project manager, who's accountable for the project, accountable for all the pieces of the plan, and is handing that out to the team members who are implementing those pieces. And the project manager, he or she, is integrating those pieces, is monitoring, controlling the work, making sure we're progressing against the baselines in the right way. So it makes sense for the cookie cutter pieces to handle that, I believe, with waterfall, with predictive planning. But so much of our world today, the customer doesn't know what they want coming into it. They're not really sure what exact design solution is going to work best. We need to discover, we need to explore, we need to emphasize creativity. For those pieces, we need to use one of the Agile methodologies. Now comes the hard part. How do we integrate those pieces together effectively, efficiently in a hybrid approach? We have to build the right culture. Management has to understand for this hybrid type of project or any agile project that the right culture has to exist for the team. And they have a big role to play. They cannot think that agile is just some nice, neat, new productivity tool to help the programmers, the developers be more successful, more efficient. They have to understand they have a key role. They're going to be involved much more frequently on a much more constant basis than they were in the old traditional waterfall type world. So a lot of work has to go into this. We've got to send everybody to training. We've got to send management to training to understand why this is important, what Agile is really about, what their role is, and also be open-minded enough to allow that some pieces are going to need to be done with again, waterfall approach too.
Susan, some nuances on that?
Yes. So Mark and I are definitely fans of Agile. So don't think that this is somehow we're trying to say, no, don't do Agile. But we're being realistic, and we have clients, we have customers that say, we want to use Agile, but we can't because of this or that, or it doesn't quite make sense in this or that area. I was actually just talking to somebody yesterday that's in telecom services, and they said, I like this idea of Agile, but I can't really use it in these certain situations where the customer has a clear set of requirements. We are obligated to deliver the full scope of what they're asking for, and they know what they want at day one. And that's not a good example of using Agile, but they have other projects where they see parts of it could use Agile. And so I think that Mark and I are talking about that elephant in the room. And I know, Tom, you and I have talked before about using Agile in a sort of like a rogue sense of well, I want to do Agile to be on the Agile train, the Agile in name only. And Mark referred to that too. And we're not talking about that. We're not talking about doing like a light version of Agile. We're talking about being very intentional about how you section off your project and what things should be Agile, what things shouldn't be. And I'm on your column, Not a Scrum Dementalist. Well, part of that is I don't want to throw out traditional just because Agile exists. So a lot of people, I teach them Agile and they're very excited about it, and they're like, well, I'm never going to do a traditional project again. And I said, oh, wait a second. It's a tool. These approaches are different tools for attacking a problem. If we go all Agile and we get rid of traditional, what we'll find is that it doesn't work for all projects, just like traditional doesn't work for all projects. And so this is meant to address that kind of in-between organization where parts work with Agile and parts don't. And so that's what we're trying to answer, that question that our clients have been asking us, have been talking to us about, and wanting solutions for.
A couple of things. People and someone wise once indicated that in a lot of instances we end up with the worst of both worlds when we hybridize. That actually may have been you, Mark, before we had the hardware failure before.
Right.
So giving people carte blanche to hybridize tends, I do believe, in my limited view of the world, to end up with the worst of both, right? So you get scenarios where people say, I want to be agile, but I don't want to change anything that I do around these projects that's waterfall. So deal with it. Arrgh.
Right. I hear that all the time. My sons, my two older sons, work in IT, and I hear these different war stories from them. I hear war stories like this at PMI chapter dinner meetings all the time, where they say, "Yes, Dad, we're using Agile, we're using Scrum, we have daily stand-up meetings, but it's the 45-minute hour stand-up meeting, and it's just a regular status meeting every day." Or yeah, we're using Agile, but we're also tracking everything with Microsoft Project and Primavera, and we've got a critical path, and everything is locked down. So yeah, we're hybrid. We're using classic scheduling tools like Microsoft Project with burn down charts and the other pieces of a information radiator that the Agilists love so much. So that's corrupt. That's corrupt Agile. And if you go about things that way, you are going to end up with the worst of both worlds instead of the best.
Yeah, I hear a lot of that, and it's kind of like I'm using an agile tool or an agile term, therefore I'm agile, and that's why I like when I teach agile to focus on the agile mindset. It literally is a different way of looking at things. One of my colleagues, we're actually working on a project together, and we started talking about the project, and we're both a little bit overwhelmed about it. So we're not ready to create a project schedule. And we started talking, and what we realized is that we don't know quite what we're going to do. So this is a small project with a colleague of mine. And so what we decided instead, we said, let's just meet every week and figure out what we're going to do that week. So we're taking a step forward, and we know what we want to do in that week, but we're just not seeing what we want to do by the end of the project. Now that's a great example for using Agile, right? So, but it's realizing when does this mindset and approach work right versus when it doesn't, rather than trying to cram a traditional project into an Agile method and end up doing these things that we're talking about. And so that's why I like the word intentional, right? So hybrid is an intentional approach. And that intentional approach should have very clear roles and delineations of what is agile and what is hybrid, what is traditional. And so then what that hybrid looks like, because it doesn't look the same for every project. And I think that differentiator makes it something very useful, very valuable, without being a scapegoat for I can't quite do agile and I can't quite do traditional. It's actually intentional, and there's a line for where that is. And that's when I think agile hybrid is a good fit.
So what would a set of criteria for being or making this intentional decision look like?
For me, it's where you know exactly what you want going into the project. The customer knows what they want basically in detail. I like to think of home remodeling projects. So we remodeled our kitchen, and my wife knew exactly what she wanted for appliances, for the countertop. And so right from the get-go, we went out and shopped for those things. What she didn't know, kind of coming into it, she knew she wanted more counter space, but there were different design alternatives or different design approaches for increasing the counter space. And she was kind of playing around with the idea, well, should we put an island in the middle of the kitchen? That would increase a lot of counter space. Should we do that? Or should we knock down the wall between the kitchen and the family room and turn that into a breakfast bar? Or can we just move stuff around? Can we just reposition things in the kitchen, the appliances, to free up more room, make it more useful? So that's kind of where prototyping, exploring ideas with, perhaps if you had good CAD software like the Property Brothers are using, you can look at different designs very quickly. You're really prototyping with that type of approach.
So was part of that done using an agile approach then? Because it sounds like you said that there was a lot that was well known up front, and then there were some things that weren't.
Right. We didn't use CAD software, even though one of my youngest son does CAD for construction projects and stuff. But no, we just she just did it with pencil and paper, kind of laying out designs, running the ideas by different contractors, general contractors coming in to get pricing for the different approaches. And then we made that command decision.
Well, let me give an example of a good use for hybrid. I've done a lot of work in the federal government. I'm sure I know Mark has. Actually, that's how we know each other. We both worked at for Census Bureau, but not at the same time. And we know each other through one of our clients there. So anyway, with the federal government, oftentimes projects all IT investment projects have certain artifacts that are required, including a project management plan, a risk management plan, risk register, all of those things that we know from traditional. And so with that, when you want development to be done in an agile way, because you want to be able to be dynamic and be able to get new requirements from the customer, reprioritize requirements. So that to me is a perfect example of why hybrid is useful, because you can have your project governance be traditional and your project team be doing development using agile. And I would say for the foreseeable future, federal projects are going to need to be done that way, U.S. federal government projects, because those requirements, especially for IT investments, they're congressionally mandated. So until Congress changes their mind about that, there is no project for IT that can be purely agile. So you cannot do pure agile Scrum in the U.S. federal government, as far as I know, for an IT investment project, because you are required those particular documents, which are coming from predictive project management. So it's almost like if they're doing agile, it has to be hybrid. They don't talk about it that way, but in my experience, that's how they operate. So you end up having this governance layer and this development, and that's how you separate it out. That's really good, though, because it's a very clear delineation, and I've seen it work successfully doing that.
So how do you marry these two things together? And obviously, that's one of the major components of the book, but can you give the listeners a sense as to how these two things, because I'll be very frank. I mean, you could probably not make me do a traditional project anymore. I'm a published author with traditional. I have a book on it. I cannot conceive of doing it. I cannot conceive of hiring anyone under 35 that I could play command and control with without them blowing up my car one night in the parking lot. Now, hey, we're all remote now, so it doesn't matter. They can't find it. But there is a fundamental difference in terms of the way people want to interact and want to be treated. I'm not disagreeing that we need some of these other control points. I'm not even sure that's bad. I'm not sure I call that hybrid per se. But how do we marry these two things together? How can we make those two competing philosophies work together without hurting each other?
Well, in my world at Hewlett-Packard, I managed in the late 90s, 2000s, early 2000s. I was managing a lot of logistic projects. So data center relocations, a large customer consolidating several data centers into one data center, or what we call large rollouts. So a large company, an enterprise company who was refreshing all of their client PCs, laptops, supporting servers and such at offices, sometimes all over the world. This, again, we had done these types of things hundreds and hundreds, thousands of times before. We had very good historical records. We could then put that into spreadsheets, use spreadsheets for doing the estimates for cost and time. And we were very confident that we were making, like 18% margin on any of these type projects. Again, doesn't mean it was easy. It was not easy because it all had to go just like clockwork. And the customers were incredibly demanding about, all this working. If we were doing the refresh, we came in after the backups were done on a Friday evening and worked through the weekend. When people came in on Monday morning, it all had to work. The networking connections, everything had to work again, just like clockwork. So it wasn't easy, but it was cookie cutter. So, and we were using subcontractors for a huge part of that work. We weren't going to use HP engineers. They were far too expensive. So we were subcontracting a lot of this work. We needed that command and control project manager to integrate all those pieces and be on top of it and make sure that it all worked fine. Even in kind of a new IT application that's being rolled out, there might be pieces that are kind of like that. You've got to set up perhaps all the infrastructure for that you've got to put together servers, networking, other things, perhaps as a first steps before you can develop the application. Wouldn't you want, in setting up those things, if you've done that all over, you don't need a dedicated team of 5 to 10 co-located, dedicated people involved in the setup of all that infrastructure, do you?
I agree, Mark. And that's actually one of the examples. I supported a large program, and one of the projects in that program was to set up the infrastructure and architecture that the other projects, as a software development project, were going to use. So how could they be agile? Because they had to set up all this infrastructure for others to use. So they kind of needed to have a plan to march to. But the other projects were doing agile, and that was fine. But we needed that architecture, the infrastructure that everyone was using, the platform that they were operating on, to be something that was planned out ahead of time. And so that's one example. The other, you talked about construction. They're doing construction in my neighborhood. They're still building houses in my community. And with that, obviously construction, you have a certain builder, and I'm looking around my backyard here and I see like houses that look very similar. So they have like the same plan that, the siding looks a different color. But once they've built that house, they build a ton of those houses. They all look the same. Now you walk in the house and it may look very different. And so that's where I think the agile part comes in. So you don't have to decide what flooring you want inside the house while you're building the foundation and doing the framing. But at some point, you need to make that decision. And so what they literally do, some of these houses, especially the ones that are like twin homes, so there's two homes attached, they'll start building both of the homes, even though one of them somebody has picked and put money down for it and picked their options. And they'll start building the other one without any of those options, and then hopefully get a buyer. And once they get that buyer, then they can put in the finishes, which could include like having a screened-in porch in the backyard, or what kind of granite countertops, or this or that. And so I look at that as a great opportunity to be hybrid, because the construction itself is traditional, but when you're picking all those finishing touches, that can really be very, very agile. And the only thing you're dealing with then is lead times on material. So I think it's a great opportunity for construction to be agile. They don't have to be 100% day one. What faucet you're going to put in your kitchen. You don't need to know day one before you pour the foundation what faucet fixture you're going to use. So I think it's a great opportunity for that.
So how do you marry the two together? What's the magic? And I don't want you to spill the whole beans of the book, But what's the magic of putting those two together so that they work?
And I don't have the answer to that myself, Tom. So the book does not provide a recipe or a menu of how to make that work. I think the answer is kind of that answer that the students in PMP prep classes hate when they ask, so what does PMI advise? What's the right way to solve this type of problem?
It depends.
And the answer is always the answer they hate. It depends.
I'm a consultant. I know that answer. But what are some of the criteria of what it depends on? I agree. I'm good with it depends.
Part of it is the organization.
Yes.
So how is it? It's an organizational culture.
It's
in
culture.
fact, one of my colleagues, and I'll name drop here because some people might know him, Dan Mezek, and I think Tom, I think you know Dan. He wrote a book years ago called The Culture Game. And it's about Agile, but it really, it's not about the tools. It's not about the technology. It's not about the methods. It's about shifting culture. And so depending on the culture, how you can do hybrid or when you need to do hybrid is going to be very, very much a function of that.
I think the company at basically through and through, especially at the high level, we need to send upper management, senior management to Agile training, also training on risk, and they have to buy into it. So if the company does not buy into it at the top and understand the need for a more enlightened culture, what I call a theory Y culture, theory Y, theory Z, what the Agilists call the Agile ethos. If they don't buy into the providing freedom and trust, powering people closest to the problem will have the best solution. If they don't understand the need for that, this isn't going to work. If we've got basically an Agile need at all, and I think almost everybody does today, this is the world we're in. We are in the world of knowledge work projects, intellectual work, design work, where things are moving very, very fast. And I think almost all companies are involved with that and therefore need to buy into that. I think as kind of the foundation for that culture, I believe that the two guys that started the company where my career was, so Dave Packard and Bill Hewlett, I believe they articulated this in 1939, 1940. They articulated this very, very well. They said, for the beginning, we believe people want to do a good job, and we're going to provide them that opportunity. They said further, we don't believe in micromanaging people. We believe the people closest to the problem are going to have the best solution. We will lay out kind of the high-level strategic objectives and goals, but we will provide freedom and trust that they can go achieve that. This worked incredibly well for them all through the 40s, the 50s, when the semiconductor boom started in Silicon Valley in the 70s. All of Silicon Valley, almost all of Silicon Valley bought into that culture. And it became kind of a crazy game, an amazing game of one-upsmanship. Intel bought into this in a huge way. They doubled down on that culture. But almost all the tech companies in Silicon Valley adopted this. I believe that the two most successful companies in Silicon Valley today are keeping that alive. And of course, those two companies are Google and Apple.
Yeah, I agree. That's a good example. And so even though you were doing traditional projects in your examples that you shared, you were in really an agile mindset environment before it was actually called that. And so I think that really that is a huge part of it, is having that agile mindset. And it should be something that's pervasive. And even I like what you said about training senior management. So I do a lot of training of, maybe I would say most of the people I'm training are project managers, which is interesting because oftentimes I'm teaching them Scrum, and then that becomes interesting because you say, okay, where's the project manager in Scrum, and there is none, right? So there's always that discussion of, well, do they become the Scrum Master? I'm like, Well, they got to shed a lot of stuff to become a good Scrum Master because it's very,
And
very different, you know?
if
So,
I can
yeah.
interrupt there, Susan, at PMI dinner meetings, and that's usually 80-90% of the project managers there are PMPs. Guess what? They're threatened by that whole concept because they say, oh my goodness, to become a scrum master, I'm basically a coordinator in weak matrix. How the heck am I going to deserve or be justified getting the salary I'm currently getting if I'm this kind of, in their mind, lowly, not so empowered scrum master?
Yeah, I mean, it's one way to look at it. I don't think it's the right way. I think the Scrum Master is the coach, the teacher, the sensei, the yogi. It's a different way of looking at it. But that's the culture shift. I think is a real big part of this. And so, unfortunately, I spend most of my time educating project managers, not the senior management. I have done some high level agile education, but I think that's very important, especially if you're going to do hybrid and especially if you're going to do pure agile. But I think pretty much every organization should have some knowledge of this at this point. Somebody said to me the other day, with everything happening, everybody now working virtual, they texted me and they said, so what do you think the impact to agile is on account of that? Like, because she basically felt like her organization in a moment had to make a decision and do something totally different, and that actually displayed agility. Like, her organization had to be agile to adapt to what was in that moment. And I agree, and I think that we all have gotten a lesson in, hey, fire drill, but it's not a drill. And now what are you going to do? And so I've also had a lot of students say to me, hey, risk management, should we have thought about this before? And I said, well, some organizations have and some haven't. And guess who the ones who are best out the door with the change, the ones who thought about it.
Before we start to wrap here, because we could go on for a while, and there's a number of different threads we could pull here. But before we do that, writing a book, and I know we've all written before, but I think writing any book, even if you're multiple into the thread of writing books, changes an individual.
Right.
How are you different for writing this book?
I think the advantage I had, my quote unquote value add in bringing this together is I am integrating the ideas of many, many other authors in this book. So I've been involved with the PMI DC chapter since just after, I guess it's like 1995, 1996, and was involved with the board with the DC chapter. I was trustee of the DC chapter from 2009 through 2013, but served in other volunteer roles. So VP of programs, VP of professional development. I've taught PMP prep classes now for 12 years, and I've been teaching Agile classes, ACP classes for 4 or 5 years. So I've been to a lot of dinner meetings. I've heard a lot of amazing presentations, some where things went very, very well, and some where they were disasters. And there were a lot of lessons learned. So I'm pulling other people's ideas and integrating that together into this book. And I think that's my main value add. I also like to read, and so I'm building on the wealth of a number of tremendous books. I think Jeff Sutherland's book, Scrum, The Art of Doing Twice the Work in Half the Time, is an amazing book. But even non-project management books, I think Tom Friedman's books, That Used to Be Us, How America Fell Behind in the World It Invented, a pretty scary book for those of us here in the US. But I think it's got huge importance and lessons for us, and lessons for corporations, lessons for people working in corporations, and also obviously lessons for project managers. So trying to bring a lot of that together in this book.
Well, and I am happy to have been a small part of it with Mark, and I appreciate that. For me, I think that the field of project management is very much being created and developed. So my background is in mechanical engineering, and sure, there's some innovation in mechanical engineering, but there's a lot of standards. You look at house construction and how far away joists can be from each other. Like there's standards out there. We have some standards in project management. We have the PMBOK guide. We have some standards in Agile, but there's a lot that is yet to be determined. And we, the three of us on this call, and including anybody listened to it, we are the ones who are designing what will be. It's because project management is so new compared to fields like electrical engineering and mechanical engineering. We get to decide those answers to those questions, to the problems that are new, to the problems that haven't been solved. And what I like about this book and any opportunity to do that is we are actually creating what is the future for project management. We have that opportunity now, and so writing is an access to that, and it's a wonderful way to share and create new ideas. The podcast is a great way to do it too, and I try to do that every day, every week, because this isn't, it's not fun to talk about the same stuff. What's fun to me is to solve a new problem, solve a problem that nobody else has solved before, nobody thought of before. And I do love how Mark integrates all of these other authors and brings it together for how we could use this to solve this problem. So I think that's what our purpose should be, is not just talking about the same old stuff, but actually solving new problems.
You both wake up tomorrow morning. Someone hands you the caffeinated beverage of your choice and a magic wand, and you have two wishes with that magic wand to change project management, how work is done through project management. What would those two wishes be and why?
Wow, that's a great question, but that's a tough question. I don't want to sound just too much like the advocate of our culture at HP, the HP way, but I worked at an amazing company. It was an incredible place to be for the time that I was there, from 1980 through the 90s into the early 2000s. And I saw how well that all worked. So that culture, again, that and culture of freedom, trust, I saw that work incredible things. That is the Agile ethos. I would like to see, and it breaks my heart, to be honest, that starting in 2000, it seemed to me about that time, we started pulling away from that. A lot of companies started retreating from those ideas. HP did, in my mind, started retreating from those ideas. And I thought that was a huge, huge mistake. I would like to see that come back. I would like to see adopting that type of culture, this Agile ethos, this culture of freedom and trust at the highest levels, management levels, knowing and realizing the benefits of that. I would like to see that come back. And I would like to see people just be more open-minded. I think my classic thing, again, I was a technical guy. I was a systems engineer, and I was a diehard supporter, of course, of the HP infrastructure. I was a HP 3000 guy, MPE, and I couldn't see my way to say anything good about DEC VAXIS. No. That was, I wanted to, hold up a cross and say, no. Same thing with the IBM 360 OS MVS operating system and architecture. I couldn't think my way to say anything good about it. I'm an ardent sports fan. I love the Washington Nationals and the Washington Capitals. I can't see, sorry. I can't see my way to say anything good about the Pittsburgh Penguins and Sidney Crosby. Guess what, Mark? I should be more open-minded. I should be able to embrace other things and see the good. And I think that about project management and project management methodologies. We need to be more open-minded, We need to listen more to what other people have to say. But as Susan said, we need to this isn't going to work unless we can sell these whole concepts to the management at our companies and get companies at really the highest levels more enlightened on these topics.
Well, I love this question, Tom. Tom always has great questions. So I like to take my magic wand, and I would like our organizations to be results focused instead of butts and seats. And I'm going to say that a silver lining to what we're going through right now is that, guess what? When people are virtual, it doesn't matter if their butt was in their seat for 12 hours in their house, because you can't see them anyway. So why don't we actually focus on bringing results? And so that would be a huge shift for project management. Even though we track things, we track costs and schedule, and Agile, we track scope and we do burn down and all those things. The reality is the culture is still about that person came in early and stayed late, and they get a star for that. You don't get stars for coming in early and staying late. You get stars for bringing results. So that's one thing I'd like to change. The other is continuous learning. Continuous learning is one of my favorite things about Agile. And this is actually goes into some of the things that Mark was saying about being in a continuous learning organization. A continuous learning organization is not afraid of failure. They embrace failure because failure is an opportunity to learn, right? So every time I go to fail, I actually learn something. Hopefully I don't fail in the same way twice, 3 times, or 4 times. I actually learn from the first failure. So I love continuous learning, and that's the other thing that I would bring into it. And as a not really a third thing, but an add-on to that is innovation. So innovation, giving people an opportunity to do something different and new. If everybody could have half of a day on Wednesday to do something new, and I know Google does this, where you're at work, but there's no meetings and you don't have a specific task related to anything you're working on, you can just do whatever you want. Google has created so many amazing things from that. I believe Gmail was created initially in that space. So, this is, I think that is also part of continuous learning, is giving people space for creativity. And we all have that desire to create and do something different. It's like a breath of fresh air from this is the stuff I got to get done this week. So those are the 2 things: results oriented and continuous learning.
Super. I wish we could get back to focusing on results. Interestingly enough, if you're into investing in companies, the ones that do surreptitious keyboard logging, keystroke logging, are doing very well right now as companies fail on this trust problem and are investing heavily in monitoring all keyboard time on their remote workers. So that is sort of the antithesis of the things that we've been talking about. Mark, Susan, co-authors of Hybrid Project Management, Using Agile with Traditional PM Methodologies to Succeed on Modern Projects. How can people continue the conversation?
So you can find me on LinkedIn, Susan Parente, or you can email me, Parente at S3-tec.com. I'm happy to talk about anything Agile, hybrid Agile, risk management. It's all fun. Certainly reach out to me. People have reached out to me before from these podcasts. It's always great to hear from you. So LinkedIn is the easiest way to find me, or you can email me at the address I gave you.
And I would just like to add, too, I think read this book. We would love it if you would read this book, Hybrid Project Management, Using Agile with Traditional PM Methodologies to Succeed on Modern Projects. And we would love your feedback. We really would like to learn. We have drunk the Kool-Aid really into Kaizen, continual improvement ourselves. We can learn a lot from you. And we would love to hear from you. Again, my contact information is my name, so mark.tolbert@verizon.net. Love to hear your feedback.
And we'll have all of that contact information in the show notes. In Reread Saturday News, this week we tackle Chapter 4 of Tame Your Workflow. The chapter is titled Utility of Flawed Mental Models. The goal of the chapter is to make sure we understand why reducing wait time makes sense and why that reduction has an impact on delivery. Remember to buy your copy of Tame Your Workflow, use the link in the show notes, and read along. The next software process and measurement cast, number 608, will feature our essay, An Agile Team in a Waterfall Company. They exist and sometimes even flourish. Our essay explores how that is possible and how teams in this circumstance can evolve. We'll also have a visit from Gene Hewson with his Form Follows Function column. If process improvement is a never-ending journey, why do so many people ask, are we there yet?